A poor little girl stepped into a corporate cafe and answered a phone call in flawless German. What no one expected was that this single moment would unravel buried lies, expose billion-dollar betrayals, and place her mother face to face with the man who once disappeared without a word. Her mother, Mira Langston, was just a quiet translator. Single mom, overlooked, outsourced, but when one corporate giant tried to silence her, she didn't shout, she didn't beg, she listened. And then she translated the truth so clearly, so powerfully, that even the most powerful men in the room had no choice but to look up. What was hidden inside the contract? Why was Mira nearly erased from the project she helped build? And how did a little girl's voice pure, innocent, unexpected start a ripple that turned into a storm? This is a story about language, power, and presence, about the voices we silence and the ones that rise anyway. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told you didn't belong, this story is for you. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that reveal the quiet strength in everyday people. Let's begin. The morning rush had begun early at the Hale Industries café. Steam curled from paper cups, laptops clicked open, the line for oat milk lattes wrapped past the window. Mira Langston wiped her hands on her apron and steadied the tray of blueberry muffins on her palm. Her fingers, calloused from long shifts, curled inward just slightly from years of work that once felt temporary. The cafe was bright and modern, tucked inside one of Chicago's most powerful tech headquarters. But Mira, at 30, had learned how illusions work. Power lived in the upper floors. Here, you just served it. Order up for table 5. She called, placing a plate of croissants beside a half-dozen analysts, at a table tucked near a tall rubber plant. A small figure sat cross-legged on a chair, mostly hidden by the leaves. Leni, Mira's 7-year-old daughter, had a book balanced on her knees and a look of quiet focus that rarely wavered. Her gold hair fell in wisps across her forehead, and her lips moved as she silently read from the worn paperback in her hands. Mira caught a glimpse of the title as she passed Der kleine Wassermann, a German children's story about a water sprite. They'd read it together the night before. Leni, despite being only 7, already understood 2 languages fluently. Mira had made sure of it. It was the one promise she never broke. Languages open doors. Moody, Leni whispered, using her nickname for Mira. How many more hours? Mira paused, bent down, straightened the collar of Leni's dress. Just 2 more, sweetheart. You doing okay? Leni nodded solemnly. I'm fine. I'm saving space for our dinner. Mira smiled, though something twisted in her stomach. Their special dinner was pasta with a sprinkle of cheese. Payday was still 3 days away. I'll bring you a muffin if I get a break. Danke, Moody, Leni replied with perfect pronunciation. But I want to stay hungry. For celebration. Mira kissed her daughter's forehead. You'll be teaching me soon. She says I speak better than the 4th graders, Leni added proudly, referring to Ms. von Trapp, their German neighbor from upstairs. Before Mira could respond, the manager's voice pierced the air. Mira, table 12's waiting. She gave Leni's hand a quick squeeze. Remember what we practiced. Stay quiet, don't bother anyone, practice my reading, Leni recited. Mira gave her a wink and stood up. And that's when the door opened. The usual bustle quieted by a fraction. Colton Hale, CEO and founder of Hale Industries, stepped inside with the kind of presence that altered temperature. Tall, sharply dressed, precise in every movement. His eyes scanned the room as if calculating yield. He rarely came down here. This cafe was beneath his floor, beneath his world. Mira swallowed, straightened her back, and moved toward the counter. The espresso machine hissed. The barista froze. Colton's eyes swept the room once more. Then the phone rang. Not a cell phone, but the old landline behind the cafe's service desk. Its shrill ring cut through the air. 1 ring, 2, 3. No one moved. Everyone was too busy or too scared. 4, 5. Leni looked up from behind the rubber plant. 6. She stood, quietly, walked up to the phone. Mira didn't see it. She was busy cleaning a spill. 7. Leni rose onto her toes and reached the receiver. "Guten Tag," she said, her voice soft, polite, automatic. There was a pause. Then a male voice on the other end responded in fluent German. "This is Herr Beck from Wolfsburg Tech," the man said. "I was hoping to reach Mr. Hale's office. We had a scheduled check-in about the transatlantic specs." Leni didn't flinch. "The executives are in a meeting," she replied, still in German. "Would you like to leave a message?" Behind her, the cafe slowed. Colton Hale had frozen mid-sip of his black coffee. His sharp eyes were now locked not on a spreadsheet, but on a little girl answering his company's business call in flawless German. "Yes," said the caller, a bit surprised. "Tell him we need confirmation of the specs in Section 2.4, and if he's available to reschedule the Zoom, as our engineers will be traveling next week." Leni reached for a pen. 2.4, confirm specs, engineers travel, and your contact information. He gave it. She wrote it carefully on the notepad beside the register, in neat block print. Then, with practiced manners, she said, "Vielen Dank. I will deliver the message immediately." As she hung up, a quiet voice behind her spoke. "And who might you be?" She turned. Colton stood just a few feet away. "I'm Leni Langston, sir," she said, chin raised slightly. "My mom works here." The phone was ringing. Nobody answered. So I did. Colton said nothing for a moment. Then he reached for the notepad. His eyes scanned the message. German, clean handwriting, accurate summary. "You speak German?" "Yes, sir. My mom taught me." Colton looked up, brow slightly furrowed. "Your mother taught you this?" Leni nodded. "She says it opens doors." Colton turned, and across the cafe. Mira caught her breath as she realized what was happening. She hurried over. Her heart raced. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I told her not to." But Colton raised a hand. "It's fine," he said. Then, after a pause, "Tell Ms. Langston to report to my office at 9 tomorrow morning." Mira's throat went dry. "Ah, yes, sir." Colton gave Leni one last look, then walked toward the elevators. The cafe buzzed again. Mira looked down at her daughter. "Leni, what just happened? I just answered the phone." "Moody," Leni whispered. "That's all." But it wasn't all, not even close. The envelope was heavier than paper should be, thick cardstock, cream-colored, pressed with a gold emblem in the corner, Hale Industries Executive Office. Mira stared at it as though it might disintegrate in her hands. She hadn't slept much. After the incident in the cafe, after Colton Hale's cryptic order for her to report upstairs at 9 her thoughts had spiraled into every possible outcome. Had Leni crossed some unspoken line? Would she be written up fired? Had her daughter embarrassed one of the most powerful men in Chicago Mira didn't know? All she knew was that the past 5 years had taught her this life rarely gave you warnings. It just happened. And when it did, you'd better be ready to adapt. She stood in front of the floor-length mirror beside the hallway closet. The cafe uniform hung loosely on the hook behind her. Today, she wore her only blouse without a stain or loose thread, and a pair of slacks she hadn't worn since a job interview 3 years ago. The fabric pinched a little at the waist, but it would have to do. Behind her, Leni sat on the small couch folding socks into neat little pairs. "Moody, should I wear my uniform too?" Mira turned. "No, baby, not today. You're coming with me. Is it because of the phone call?" "Yes." "Will I get in trouble?" Mira knelt down and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. I should have never brought you to work, but I didn't have another choice. If there are consequences, they're mine, not yours." Leni's face scrunched up. But who would have answered that man if I hadn't? That simple, honest question wrapped around Mira's heart like a vine. "You're right," she whispered. "Let's go see if Mr. Hale agrees." They boarded the elevator in silence. The mirrored walls reflected back a woman who barely recognized herself. Eyes tired, mouth tight with uncertainty. She held Leni's small hand like it was her anchor. The higher the elevator climbed, the quieter the air became. At the 20th floor, the doors slid open to reveal another world entirely. Thick carpets muffled footsteps, glass walls gleamed. A receptionist with airbrushed perfection raised an eyebrow but said nothing as she gestured toward the executive waiting area. The chairs were leather. The view behind the glass stretched out across the city, lakeshore glimmering in the distance. Leni leaned in. "Everything smells like paper and lemon." Mira almost smiled. "Ms. Langston." A young woman appeared, tablet in hand, tailored pantsuit crisp as ice. "Mr. Hale will see you now." They stepped into the office. It was larger than their entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the room in morning light. Shelves of business awards lined the back wall, interspersed with the occasional framed photograph, a boy on a bike, a woman holding a violin, a dog with a tilted head. There was even a faded drawing in crayon behind a dark walnut desk. Colton Hale stood, sleeves rolled, tie slightly loosened. His expression was unreadable. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Please, have a seat." Mira guided Leni into the chair beside her, perched on the edge of her own like a student facing expulsion. "Mr. Hale, about yesterday. These," he interrupted, sliding a notepad across the desk, "are remarkable." Mira looked down. It was Leni's handwriting, the German message she'd taken during the phone call. Neatly printed, concise, accurate. "Your daughter captured details our international relations team has missed in their last 3 calls with Wolfsburg Tech." Colton continued. "That's not just translation, that's understanding." Mira blinked. She'd expected reprimand, not praise. "Tell me, Ms. Langston," Colton said, leaning back, "why is someone with a linguistics degree from Northwestern fluent in 3 languages, finalist in the Global Translation Initiative serving coffee on my 3rd floor?" Mira froze. "How do you know all that I had HR pull your file?" There was no judgment in his voice, just curiosity, like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. "I dropped out of my master's program," Mira said carefully, "right before graduation. I had Leni. No family support, no partner, just me." Colton's brow lifted slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "I applied for more than 200 positions." Mira continued. But interviews ended as soon as they found out I had a child. Employers don't say it directly, but they don't need to. It's in the way they look at you, like you're unstable, unreliable. She stopped. Her hands were trembling. Their loss, Colton said. He stood and walked over to a side table, poured a glass of water, returned and placed it in front of her. Ms. Langston, I have a proposition for you. She blinked. Our company is entering final negotiations with Wolfsburg Tech for a cross-licensing agreement. The details are sensitive. Cultural accuracy and linguistic precision are paramount. Our usual interpreters aren't cutting it. He slid a folder toward her. 3-month contract. Consultant level, high flexibility, competitive pay, and, most importantly, it includes access to our executive childcare suite. Mira opened the folder slowly. Inside was the kind of opportunity she hadn't dared imagine in years, a role that aligned with everything she'd trained for. She read the title again, Cultural and Linguistic Strategy Consultant. She swallowed hard. Why me? Because I watched your daughter handle a call with more poise than some of our executives. Colton replied, because I believe talent is talent, no matter where it currently stands. He looked at Leni, who was quietly sketching shapes in the condensation of the glass table. And maybe because she reminded me of someone I used to know. Mira was quiet. This is a lot to process, she said finally. Colton nodded. I don't need an answer now, but I do need one by Monday. Our first meeting with the Germans is Tuesday morning. He handed her a business card. Think it over. Carefully. Mira stood, clutching the folder as though it might disappear. She turned to thank him, but Colton was already facing the windows, hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning the skyline like he was already thinking 5 moves ahead. Back in the elevator. Leni leaned against her. Did you say yes? Not yet, Mira whispered. Why not? Because I'm not sure I remember how to be that person. What person? The one who used to sit at the front of the class, the one who dreamed of international summits and changing the world through language? Leni thought for a moment. Maybe she's still in there, just waiting for you to say yes. Mira smiled softly. Maybe. It was well past midnight by the time Mira closed the apartment door behind her. The hallway was dark, save for a dim bulb flickering outside Ms. Rivera's unit. The hush of sleeping neighbors wrapped around her like a blanket. But her thoughts were anything but quiet. She placed the folder Colton Hale had given her on the small kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. Its cover read, Confidential Cultural and Linguistic Strategy Consultant. The words shimmered like they belonged to someone else. She didn't touch it for another 15 minutes. Leni was already asleep, curled on their second-hand couch with her stuffed owl. Otto, tucked beneath her chin. Mira brushed a kiss onto her daughter's forehead and tiptoed to the kitchen. She pulled out the single chair, sat down slowly, and opened the folder. Inside were 8 pages, typed, precise, intimidating. Section 1, Scope of Work. Section 2, Pay and Benefits. Section 3, Schedule Flexibility. Section 4, Confidentiality Clauses. Section 5, Penalties for Breach. By the time she got to Section 5, her breath caught. The wording was stern, legalistic. If she missed a deliverable or mishandled privileged information, the company reserved the right to terminate the contract immediately and, in some cases, to pursue financial damages. She closed her eyes. It's just a formality, she told herself. A standard protection. But fear had already slipped into her bloodstream. She hadn't sat in a real conference room in 7 years. She hadn't written a policy memo or translated a technical document since her thesis. Her confidence, already fragile, felt like it was made of spun glass. She reread the salary line again. It was 4 times what she made at the café, and it came with full benefits, childcare access, and a potential pathway to something permanent. Still, the fear remained. "You okay, Mija?" The voice startled her. She looked up. Ms. Rivera stood in the doorway, wrapped in a faded robe, a plastic bag of empanadas in one hand. "I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. I could smell your stress from down the hall," the older woman said with a tired smile, stepping into the kitchen. "You looked like someone trying to make peace with ghosts." Mira laughed softly. "That's exactly what it feels like." Rivera sat down and pushed the bag toward her. "Eat. Think better with food in your belly." Mira opened the bag, the scent of warm pastry making her realize just how long it had been since dinner. She took a bite, then another. "What's the decision?" Rivera asked gently. "A real job. In my field, good pay, but hard hours, travel, pressure, big expectations. You scared terrified. You've been preparing for this since I met you. Every night with your nose in a language book, every time you told Leni a bedtime story in 2 languages, every morning you got up before dawn so she wouldn't feel you breaking." Mira looked down at the paper again. "It's been so long since I was that version of myself," she admitted. "I don't know if I can still be her, the one with the sharp mind and the bright future." Rivera reached across the table and placed a warm, work-worn hand over hers. "She's not gone, Mija. She's just been waiting, and this is the knock." Leni's voice, half asleep, called from the living room. Moody Mira stood and walked over. The little girl was sitting up, her cheeks flushed from sleep, eyes half-lidded. "You're still working a little. I didn't mean to wake you." Leni patted the cushion beside her. Mira sat. Leni leaned her head on her mother's shoulder and looked at the contract. "That's from the man with the sharp voice." "Yes. Does it mean you get to be the boss of the Germans?" Mira chuckled. "Not exactly. More like a translator between worlds." Leni blinked up at her. "Isn't that what you always wanted to be?" Mira didn't answer for a moment. Then she nodded. It was. Leni took her hand, her small fingers curling into Mira's palm. "Then say yes. And if it's hard, I'll help. I already know how to make toast, and I can dress myself for school, and I know how to write my name with all the loops." Mira pressed a kiss to her temple. "You shouldn't have to help with grown-up things, but I want to," Leni whispered, "because you do so much for me. Every day." Mira felt the lump rise in her throat before she could stop it. "You're a little miracle. You know that I'm your little miracle." The clock on the wall ticked. Mira stood and went back to the kitchen. She picked up the pen, hovered over the signature line, and signed. 3 words, Mira Langston. Just above them, the date, Monday, March 20th. By the time dawn touched the edges of the city skyline, Mira had gone from café waitress to strategic consultant. And somewhere in that quiet transformation, a piece of herself returned. Later that morning, Leni packed her own school bag and kissed Miss Rivera on the cheek before heading downstairs with Mira. The 2 of them stood on the curb as Mira hailed a rideshare. "Are you nervous?" Leni asked. "Very. Want me to come with you and hold your hand?" Mira smiled. "Maybe next time. Today, I have to go alone." Colton's office was even more intimidating when she entered it the second time. He stood by the window again, watching the morning fog lift off the lake. He turned only when she spoke. I read the terms. I signed the contract. But I made some notes. Suggestions. About the flexibility clause. I'd like to propose a framework for balancing fieldwork with childcare. I even mocked up a 2-tiered availability grid. Colored blocks to make it easier. She handed him the page. He took it, read it, didn't smile, but didn't frown either. This is thorough. I believe if I'm going to do this, I need to do it right. And that means not burning out in week 2. You'll be expected to adapt to changing priorities. I'm used to juggling 12 things with a child on my hip. I can adapt, but I won't abandon my daughter for a quarterly projection. A long pause, then Colton nodded once. We'll include your framework, just like that. You don't ask for permission to be a good parent. Ms. Langston, you just are. She blinked. Thank you. Your team assignment begins tomorrow. You'll report to the International Strategy Division. And Maratha's time. He actually used her first name. You belong in this building. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. As she stepped back into the elevator, Mira felt something shift. Not her life. Not yet. But her posture. She was no longer looking up at the floors above her, hoping for a break. She was already on her way. The elevator chimed on the 14th floor with a crisp digital note. Mira adjusted the strap of her thrifted leather satchel and stepped out into a different world. Gone were the smells of coffee and pastry from the café. Here, the air held the faint scent of expensive cologne, printer toner, and old money. Glass walls stretched around sleek offices. Low voices buzzed behind polished doors. Everyone moved with a kind of purposeful rhythm that made Mira instantly aware of the second-hand blazer she'd ironed twice and still wasn't sure fit right. The receptionist didn't even look up as she passed. No one offered a smile. She clutched the welcome packet Colton's assistant had handed her, an orientation checklist, building map, security badge with her full name and new title printed in all caps. Mira Langston, Cultural Strategy Consultant. It didn't feel real yet, like she was walking through someone else's promotion dream, or worse, like she'd snuck in, pretending. A young man with neatly parted hair and 2 white sneakers appeared at her side. Ms. Langston, I'm Jared. Mr. Hale asked me to give you the tour. He offered a handshake she barely had time to accept before he was already walking. This way. She followed him past a glass-walled conference room where half a dozen people stared at a projection of a German financial model. Her eyes darted instinctively over the spreadsheet. The phrasing wasn't quite right. The terms Betriebsübertragung and Vermögensverwertung were being used interchangeably. Not the same thing at all. Jared kept talking. That's the international finance team. You'll work with them in the tech division on the Wolfsburg contract. Your office is just around here. Office? She tried not to react, but the word still felt too big for her. He opened the door to a modest space with a frosted window, clean desk, a chair that didn't squeak, a brand new laptop, and a phone she hadn't used in years, the kind with 5 blinking lines. Your logins on the sticky note. There's fresh coffee in the break room, and Ms. Vaughn will brief you at 10 sharp. Ms. Vaughn Elise Vaughn, Director of Strategy. She's heading up the Wolfsburg deal. You'll love her, he added, without enough sincerity to convince a goldfish. Mira nodded slowly. Thank you. Jared. Sure thing. Welcome to the glass floor, he said with a lopsided grin before vanishing back into the hallway. She placed her satchel on the chair, touched the keyboard gently, and stared at her name etched into the plaque beside the door. Mira Langston. No Moody here. No ketchup stains or register tape or tips that barely covered groceries. She took a breath, another, and turned on the laptop. 10 minutes before her first meeting, she headed to the break room. It was filled with sleek machines and carefully curated snacks labeled with allergens. She reached for a cup of coffee when a voice behind her broke the air. "Did you just get promoted out of the café?" Mira turned. A tall, flawless woman in a navy-sheath dress stood with her arms crossed. Platinum hair pulled into a chignon so precise it could have been made with string and math. Her lipstick matched her heels, and her expression could have frozen boiling water. "Excuse me, I'm Elise Vaughn," the woman said coolly, "and I assume you're Mira, the surprise guest, Mr. Hale, personally onboarded." Mira straightened. "Yes, I've been assigned to assist on the Wolfsburg project." That one syllable carried Layer's dismissal, suspicion, warning. Mira didn't flinch. "Looking forward to collaborating," she said, lifting her coffee and turning to leave. Elise's voice followed her down the hallway. "Let's hope your German's better than your coffee." At 10 on the dot. Mira entered the strategy room. The table was long and glossy. A dozen people sat in high-backed chairs, each with a laptop, stylus, or espresso. Elise sat at the head, flipping through a folder like it owed her money. "This is Mira Langston," she announced without looking up. "She'll be assisting with cross-cultural interpretation and document translation for Wolfsburg Tech. Temporary placement." Someone across the table whispered. "So, a glorified translator." Mira sat without reacting. Elise tossed her a slim folder. "That's the contract draft. German version. Mark inconsistencies, suggest alternate phrasing. We'll be reviewing Section 6 today." Mira opened the file and scanned the first paragraph. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "The syntax in the third line could imply unequal partnership," she said calmly. "Instead of gemeinsame Nutzung, consider gleichwertige integration. It's a stronger reflection of bilateral equity." The room went quiet. Elise's eyes flicked up. "Noted." They continued the review. Mira didn't speak again unless asked. But when she did, people listened. Her observations were surgical, but never harsh. She corrected without arrogance. She clarified without lecturing. And by the end of the hour, even the whisperers were scribbling her comments into their notes. When the meeting ended, no one made eye contact. She returned to her office and sat in silence for a while, replaying it all. She hadn't been perfect. Her hands had shaken slightly when she opened the folder. Her stomach had churned through the first question. But she had held her ground. Outside her window, the sky was beginning to clear. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ms. Rivera. "Leni did great today." She showed off her new German flashcards, said her mama's in a tall building fixing broken words. Mira smiled. The ache in her shoulders loosened just a little. Later that evening, after the office had thinned out, she stayed behind to read technical appendices. The Wolfsburg deal involved proprietary software integration and licensing terminology she wasn't yet familiar with. She read each word aloud quietly, translating in real time, making notes on areas she needed to study. "You're still here." She looked up. Colton Hale stood in the doorway, tie loosened, his usual stone expression softened by fatigue. "Didn't want to miss a deadline," she replied. He nodded. "They're already talking about you in strategy. Good things. Mostly." He walked in and placed a thumb drive on her desk. "These are the reference specs for the product's EU compliance track. Memorize them." Mira picked up the drive. "No pressure, huh?" Colton smirked faintly. "Pressure separates the curious from the capable. And which one am I?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I think we're about to find out." The storm rolled in by late afternoon. At first, it was just a change in the light sunlight filtered through gray clouds that seemed to sneak up on the city without warning. Then came the pressure drop, the sudden stillness, and finally, the distant rumble of thunder behind the skyline. Inside the 14th floor conference room, nobody noticed. Mira sat near the end of the long table, her notes organized in front of her, a half-drunk cup of coffee beside her laptop. It had been 3 weeks since she joined the project. 3 weeks of early mornings, silent lunches, and long nights learning to translate not just language, but culture, nuance, and motive. Tonight's meeting was unplanned. Wolfsburg Tech had requested an emergency session to clarify licensing clauses sections that, according to the email Colton forwarded to her, were alarmingly ambiguous. It was Mira who'd pointed out the ambiguity 2 days earlier, and now the Germans wanted answers. She glanced at the digital clock on the wall. 6:48 p.m. The room was nearly full. Colton sat at the head of the table, reviewing his notes. Elise was already there, typing furiously on her tablet. Others filtered in one by one: legal counsel, tech leads, the junior compliance manager who still avoided Mira's eyes like she carried contagion. The projector whirred to life, casting the Wolfsburg logo across the screen. The video call connected with a short beep. On the other side, 4 executives appeared. 3 Mira recognized from previous meetings, but the 4th made her heart stall. He was older than she remembered, with shorter hair and a new pair of rimless glasses, but the jawline was the same. So were the eyes, cold, analytical, sharp as glass. Jonas Schaefer. He sat confidently at the center of the camera frame, speaking in rapid German to someone off-screen. Mira's fingers tightened around her pen. She hadn't seen him in almost 8 years, hadn't heard his voice since she told him she was pregnant, and he had vanished. Now he was here, sitting in a corporate boardroom on another continent, his image flickering in and out beneath a lightning-streaked sky. Colton looked over. "Mira, you'll be translating as usual. Real-time accuracy. No summaries. Yes, sir." Her voice was steady. Her stomach wasn't. The call began. Formal greetings, pleasantries, small talk. Jonas didn't react when Colton introduced Mira. If he recognized her, he gave no sign. But she caught a moment one flicker, a pause in his gaze when she first translated. He knew. The meeting moved quickly. They began dissecting Section 4 of the contract, the ownership rights of shared code bases. Mira moved between English and German with careful precision. She mirrored tone, paused for nuance, and when the Wolfsburg engineer began rattling off a dense technical list, she translated every clause without hesitation. Even Elise had stopped typing. At one point, the German team asked a question loaded with cultural weight, whether Hale Industries' oversight clause implied lack of trust in Wolfsburg's compliance. Mira shifted gears. She translated the phrase into a softer German equivalent, invoking mutual partnership, shared innovation. The tension on screen visibly eased. Colton shot her a glance approval, unmistakable. Then Jonas leaned forward. "Ms. Langston," he said, in perfect English this time, "forgive me, but your accent, it's familiar. Where did you study German?" Mira didn't blink. "University of Michigan, and a semester in Heidelberg." "Ah," he said smoothly. "A long time ago, perhaps." Colton looked between them but said nothing. Mira kept her expression neutral. 8 years, she said simply. Jonas smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. The meeting resumed. Mira focused on the language, the clauses, the terms. But, under the table, her hand had gone cold. The man on the screen had once held her future in his hands and dropped it like a cigarette. She translated until 9:03 p.m. When the meeting ended, Mira packed her things quickly. She needed air. Her mind was racing, her chest tight with unspent fury. "Mira," Colton called as she reached the door. She turned. "Stay for a moment." The others filed out, Elise giving her a passing look that was half smirk, half pity. Colton waited until the room was empty. "That man," he said, folding his arms, "Jonas Schaefer. You've met." Mira took a deep breath. "Yes, I thought so." She met his eyes. "He's Leni's father." Colton absorbed this. He didn't react, not the way she expected. No shock, no outrage, just quiet processing. "Does he know? Not officially." He walked away before I told him. Changed his number. Blocked everything. Colton's jaw flexed, but his voice remained even. "Will he become a problem?" Mira hesitated. "Then, he already is." She pulled her phone from her coat pocket, tapped a message open. A single line from Jonas, sent during the call. "Is that child mine?" Colton read it. His lips tightened. "I'll handle it." "No," Mira said quickly. "Let me." Colton nodded once. "If he threatens you, I want to know." Mira left the building just as the storm broke in earnest. Rain hit the pavement like nails. Thunder cracked overhead. She hurried into the street, breath fogging in the cold, her mind still looping one question. What was Jonas doing here that night? Leni slept peacefully, unaware. Ms. Rivera had left a note and a container of lentil soup. Mira couldn't eat. She sat at the kitchen table and stared at her phone. The notification was still there. "Is that child mine?" She answered with a single word. "Yes." 3 dots appeared, then stopped. No reply came. She didn't sleep. At 3:16, a second message arrived. "We need to talk. Alone. Soon." Mira turned off her phone and placed it face down on the table. She had climbed so far, and now the past was reaching up like a hand through ice water. She would face it, but not on Jonas's terms. The next morning, Mira sat across from Colton Hale in his private office, the city skyline blurring behind the rain-slicked windows. Neither of them said much for the first minute. A silence, heavy but not hostile, settled between them. "I've never brought personal matters to work," she said finally, "and I don't intend to start, but I owed you context." Colton nodded. "He's requesting a private meeting. Our teams were CC'd on his email. He wants a clarification lunch off record. Just you and him." "Of course he does." Colton watched her, eyes steady. "You don't have to go." Mira didn't answer right away. "I want to," she said at last, "but not to give him what he wants. I just need to see if he's still the same man who walked away before Leni was born." She didn't say what she feared most, that he wasn't, that he might have changed, grown, become someone capable of asking for forgiveness, because that would be harder than if he were still cold, still selfish, That would leave her with choices, and choice could be its own kind of burden. "Where are you meeting him?" Colton asked. "The Riverside Hotel." "Noon today." Colton didn't argue, but the muscle in his jaw twitched once before he picked up a folder. "After that, we'll need your input on the equity clauses. They're shifting toward a shared patent structure." She nodded, grateful, silently, that he didn't press further. Back at her desk, Mira reread the email Jonas had sent. It was so perfectly worded it felt like a resume bullet point. No emotion, just logistics. "Let's meet today. Lunch. You choose if we talk as strangers or as whatever we were, but we need to speak." She forwarded the calendar invite to her personal email and stood in the restroom mirror. She checked her reflection. There was nothing extraordinary about her appearance: plain black blouse, pressed slacks, minimal makeup. But her eyes looked different. Sharper, tired, strong. She hadn't worn perfume. Jonas had once told her he liked the way she smelled after coffee and books. She didn't want to give him anything familiar today. The Riverside Hotel lobby smelled like citrus and silence, marble floors, velvet chairs, and discreet attendants who knew not to ask questions. She found him already seated on the outdoor terrace under the covered awning. The rain had slowed to a mist, and the river just beyond the railing glimmered like polished steel. He stood as she approached, polite, controlled. Mira, Jonas. They sat. She declined the wine list, ordered tea. He didn't waste time. "You have a daughter?" "Yes, she's mine." "She's mine," Mira said, evenly. He flinched at that. A small thing, but she caught it. "I didn't know," he said. "You disappeared." Mira laughed once, bitter. "You blocked me on every platform the day I told you I was pregnant. Don't rewrite history." "Jonas." He looked away, then back. "I was afraid. I was about to join Wolfsburg's accelerator program. Everything was fragile. One scandal, one child, one mistake." He whispered. The air snapped between them. Mira didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You don't get to call her that." Jonas swallowed hard. "I didn't mean you meant exactly what you said, and that's why you don't get to know her." He leaned back. "I'm not asking to be in her life." That surprised her. "Then why this meeting?" He looked down, then up. "Because Colton Hale is watching you, and because your name is starting to show up in minutes, in summaries, in investor emails." Mira blinked. "Jonas, are you afraid I'm going to embarrass you?" "I'm afraid of what this looks like to my partners," he said tightly. "You suddenly in a position of power, in proximity, translating private discussions." She scoffed. "So you assume I'm here to sabotage you? To what? Get revenge?" He didn't answer. Mira leaned forward. "Let me make something clear. I didn't claw my way back into this world to chase you. You're a footnote in a chapter I don't read anymore. I'm here for Leni. I'm here because I still believe language can change the course of a company, a policy, a world." She took a breath. "And if you feel threatened by me being competent, maybe that says more about you than about me." Jonas held her gaze for a long time, then looked away. "She looks like you," he said softly. Mira stood. "She's better than both of us." Before she walked away, she turned back, and for the record, I deleted the email you sent me 3 years ago, the one that said, "Don't contact me again." But I remember every word. She left him sitting there with his untouched espresso and silence. Back in the office, Colton didn't ask how the meeting went. But when she walked into the strategy session that afternoon, Elise paused mid-sentence when she saw her. Mira took her seat, opened her notes, and asked the team to revisit the second clause on equity distribution. Nobody argued. Later that evening, Mira sat on the floor of her apartment, folding laundry with Leni. "Did you ever meet my dad?" Leni asked suddenly. Mira stilled. "Yes." "Was he nice?" Mira thought about the question carefully. "Not to me, but I don't think he knew how to be." Leni looked up. "That's kind of sad." "It is, but we're not sad," Leni added. Mira smiled. "No, we're not." That night, as rain whispered against the windows, Mira pulled out her old university notebook, the one she hadn't touched in years. She flipped through the pages. Notes on syntax, case studies on cultural translation, diagrams on language maps. At the back was a quote she'd written during her senior seminar. "Language is not just expression. It is power. It is memory. It is resistance." She closed the book gently and knew she was exactly where she needed to be. Mira arrived at work the next morning to find her office door ajar and a printed document sitting on her desk. It was a memo signed, no letterhead, just a single paragraph centered on the page. "The company's trust is a privilege, not a right. Confidentiality breaches, especially those involving personal entanglements with key stakeholders, jeopardize ongoing negotiations. Silence is expected. Loyalty is required." Mira read it twice, then a third time. She closed the door behind her, locked it, and sat down. The language was vague but unmistakably targeted. Someone was calling her out anonymously, of course, but with enough venom to bruise. She didn't need to guess who had sent it. Elise Vaughn. It wasn't just the phrasing. It was the tone. The quiet condescension dressed in corporate legalese. Mira could feel Elise's fingerprints on the paper like residual heat. She'd seen that same weaponized professionalism used against interns, analysts. Even senior staff passive-aggressive memos slipped through office channels to undermine, destabilize, isolate. This was not just a warning. It was bait. But Mira didn't bite. Instead, she placed the memo in her drawer, closed it calmly, and logged into the internal system. There was a full schedule ahead, 2 department huddles, a partner call with French executives, and a strategy debrief with Colton scheduled for 4:30, and Elise would be at all 3, in the hallway outside the main boardroom. Mira crossed paths with her just before the first meeting. Elise stood with one heel perched on the bench behind her, checking her wristwatch like she was timing someone's demise. "Mira," she said, voice crisp as paper. "You look well rested." Mira offered a half smile. "Thanks. Must be the sense of clarity that comes from knowing exactly who's trying to undermine me." Elise tilted her head. "Faux innocent. Undermine. That's such a dramatic word. So unbecoming." Mira leaned in just slightly. "I've read your reports. You like precision. So let me offer you a better word, transparent." Elise blinked, then laughed lightly. "Well, I suppose every team needs a mascot." Mira's reply was quiet, almost warm. "True, but mascots don't rewrite policy documents in 3 languages and save you from cultural PR nightmares. That's usually consultants." She walked into the boardroom before Elise could respond. During the meeting, Mira held her ground. She clarified a misstep in the French delegation's phrasing. Recommended changes to onboarding documents for the Berlin launch. And without being asked, spotted a translation inconsistency in a patent clause that could have cost the company thousands in licensing ambiguity. Colton nodded silently after that last correction. Elise said nothing, but her pen scribbled across her notebook like it was scoring a vendetta. Later, as Mira stepped into the elevator heading to her next session, Jared, the junior associate who had once given her the office tour, joined her. He pressed the button for 17. "Hey," he said, glancing around. "You okay?" Mira hesitated. "Why, just, there's a vibe," he said awkwardly. "Some of the old-timers think Elise is prepping a formal complaint." "About me?" "Yeah. Whispered something about you blurring lines, that it's unprofessional to have history with a client." Mira exhaled slowly. "I've done nothing wrong." Jared nodded. "I believe you. But she's strategic. Tell me something I don't know." "Okay," he said, lowering his voice. "She also drinks boxed wine and cried during a town hall Zoom last year when someone called her out on LinkedIn." Mira laughed despite herself. "You didn't hear it from me." He added quickly. "Didn't hear what by late afternoon. The building had begun to thin out." Colton's debrief was scheduled in one of the smaller conference rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city's west side, where the river wound like a silver thread, and the sun, if it ever came out, would hit the glass just right. He was already there when Mira walked in, reviewing a legal appendix. "You catch wind of the memo?" he asked, not looking up. "Which one, the anonymous one?" HR found a copy left near the printer on 9. Security pulled camera logs. Mira sat across from him, and no signature. "But they're narrowing it down. I'm guessing you have a theory." "I do." "You want to say her name out loud?" Mira shook her head. "I don't give her that satisfaction." Colton set the file down. "People like Elise don't respond to confrontation," he said. "They respond to exposure. And once they realize they're not operating in the dark, they lose half their power." "She's trying to isolate me," Mira said. "From the team. From you. She won't." "You sure?" "Yes." She let the word sit for a moment, then asked, "Why do you believe in me?" "Colton." He leaned back in his chair. "Because you're not here to impress anyone. You're here to work. And because the first time you stepped into this building, you looked everyone in the eye except the one man who once broke you. That kind of restraint doesn't come from ego. It comes from strength." Mira felt something tighten in her chest, but it wasn't pain. It was something like recognition. He reached into his folder and pulled out a slim stack of papers. New assignment. Wolfsburg's requesting an embedded translator for the Munich rollout. You'd be stationed there for 6 weeks. Mira raised an eyebrow. "You're sending me abroad. If you're willing, it's high visibility, full autonomy, and a lease. She's not going. Her German's clumsy, and she has too many commitments on this end. Besides," he said, "standing to leave. She works better behind glass walls. You seem more comfortable in the fire." Mira walked home that night slower than usual. She didn't tell Leni about the trip knot yet, but she let her daughter stay up an extra hour, reading together on the couch under the old quilt. When Leni finally fell asleep, Mira pulled out her suitcase from the back of the closet and placed it by the door. Not as a decision, but as a promise that she wouldn't be chased out. Not this time. Mira stood by the window in her apartment, watching headlights slip across the wet asphalt below. The city was quieter than usual. Even the neon diner sign across the street had gone dim, flickering its final red O like a sigh. Her suitcase was packed. Her carry-on sat open on the kitchen table, waiting for the final essentials passport. Charger, Lily's photo, 6 weeks in Munich, a different country, a different rhythm, and more eyes on her than ever before. She had said yes that morning without hesitating. Not out of ambition, but because somewhere deep in her bones, she knew this was a threshold. Some doors opened gently. This one roared like a jet engine. Leni padded out of her room in fuzzy socks, clutching her stuffed koala. "Can't sleep," she mumbled. Mira knelt and pulled her daughter close. "I'm flying out tomorrow. Remember, that's probably why." Leni nodded into her shoulder. "Are there stars in Germany?" "Yes," Mira said, smiling. "Different sky, but same stars. Can we count them when you call every night?" Mira kissed her on the forehead and whispered, "You're the bravest thing I've ever done." Leni didn't understand the full weight of that sentence, but someday she would. The next morning, Ms. Rivera arrived early. Leni clung to Mira at the doorway, holding back tears like a small soldier. 6 weeks goes fast, Mira promised, though her heart ached. On the way to the airport, Mira scrolled through the travel briefing from Hale Industries. Her itinerary was efficient direct flight, reserved hotel suite near the Wolfsburg offices, car pickup arranged. Attached was a confidential note from Colton. "Trust your instincts. Language is your sword. Use it wisely." She read it twice, then powered down her phone. The flight boarded late. Mira found her seat by the window, row 8A. The man beside her wore earbuds and didn't glance her way. The cabin smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale croissants. As the plane climbed into the sky, she looked out the window and thought of every version of herself she'd had to bury just to reach this point. The student who once believed fluency would be enough. The waitress who learned to smile through condescension. The single mother who made peace with rejection letters and bounced checks. And now, the woman flying toward a city where the man who had left her behind might soon sit across from her again, this time not as a lover, but as an adversary in suits and dotted lines. When they landed in Munich, the air was thinner, colder. The car that met her was sleek and silent. The driver barely spoke. Her hotel suite overlooked the Isar River. She dropped her bags, washed her face, and changed into a gray blazer before heading to Wolfsburg Tech's downtown headquarters for the welcome meeting. The lobby was pristine, filled with chrome accents and multilingual signage. Her badge was ready at the front desk. She stepped into the glass elevator, alone. It rose without sound. In the reflection, she didn't see the woman from years ago. She saw someone unshaken. The welcome briefing was brisk. A bilingual assistant named Alina walked her through the scheduled language audits, product launch vocabulary testing, final contract glossary revisions. Mira took notes. Every detail mattered now. The last meeting of the day was unexpected. "Mr. Schaefer would like a word," Alina said gently. Mira didn't flinch. "Where Conference 6B." She followed the hallway until she found the door already open. Jonas stood by the window, suit jacket draped over the back of a chair, sleeves rolled. "Thanks for coming." "I wasn't asked," Mira replied. He gestured toward the chair. "Still, I appreciate it." She didn't sit. Jonas watched her with something like caution. "You're not what I expected." Mira folded her arms. "Because I didn't stay small, because you didn't stay angry." "I never stopped being angry," she said quietly. "I just got good at managing it." He walked to the table and picked up a file. "This is the final draft of the multilingual framework. I've already approved it, but I'd like your feedback." "Because you trust me?" she asked. "No," he said honestly, because the board does. Mira flipped open the folder. The German sections were decent, but the French translation was rushed. The Turkish addendum was nearly unusable. She handed it back. Your framework will collapse under its own ego. He raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. You assumed this project was about efficiency. It's about context, culture, rhythm. You translated words, not meanings. Jonas said nothing for a moment. You always did cut right to it. That's because you never could. He leaned against the table, his voice low. Are we going to keep circling like this? We're not circling, we're landing. And I'm not here to discuss what you lost. I'm here to build what you don't understand. And what's that? Mira tilted her head slightly. That language is an act of empathy. You don't just speak it. You feel your way into it. For once, Jonas didn't have a comeback. He picked up the folder again. I'll have the team revise it. Mira turned to leave. Wait, he said. She paused. I saw her picture, he said. Leni, in the background of your Zoom frame last week. Mira's throat went tight. She's not your leverage. I know. She's not your legacy either, she added. Not unless you earn the right. She walked out before he could reply. That evening, in her hotel room. Mira stood on the balcony and called home. Leni picked up on the second ring. Did you see the stars? Her daughter asked. Not yet, Mira whispered, but I feel them. In the distance, the river moved like a mirror catching moonlight, and somewhere across oceans and time zones, Mira understood something for the first time. She hadn't come this far to survive Jonas. She had come this far to transcend him. The following morning, the Wolfsburg team hosted a closed-door strategy session with their local investors. Mira was only invited as a silent observer. Her badge color designated her as external partner, which technically barred her from influencing content, but no one told her she couldn't listen or notice. The room was lined with polished wood and LED panels designed for sleekness, not warmth. Investors sat with perfectly folded agendas, glasses of still water untouched beside their tablets. Jonas led the discussion, accompanied by a thin man in tortoiseshell glasses named Henrik, the company's chief strategic liaison. Mira sat in the second row, headphones on, translator mic muted. Her eyes scanned posture, rhythm, pause. She wasn't just hearing the words, they were windows, and something was off. The French investor, ma'am. Laffont asked a simple question about data licensing protocols. Jonas gave a confident answer. Too confident. Mira watched her blink, tilt her head slightly, and lean back in her chair. She didn't believe him. Later, the Turkish delegate mentioned export limits. Henrik deflected, citing internal discretion protocols. Again. Mira saw the reaction, not on the lips, but in the fingers of the delegate as they tapped once, then stopped completely. It was the kind of stillness that signaled withheld trust. By the end of the meeting, Mira had written a full page of notes not on content, but on subtext. She returned to her temporary office in the lower floor and began cross-checking contract versions. Hale Industries had submitted a glossary amendment last week. Wolfsburg never acknowledged receipt. She opened the metadata logs. Sure enough, there it was. Received, opened, but not shared forward. She picked up her phone. Colton, she said when he answered, we may have a problem. Wolfsburg's withholding information. Your revisions never made it into the master file. Silence. Send me screenshots, he said calmly. Then, pack for Berlin. Berlin. They're holding a shadow summit there. Quiet session between Wolfsburg's founders and a potential acquisition group. You'll be our eyes." Mira paused. "Are you sure they'll let me in?" "They already have. I used my leverage." That evening, she reviewed documents on her hotel bed with her laptop balanced on her knees. Outside, the city buzzed gently. Trams hummed. Footsteps echoed across cobblestones. It was a different music than back home. Sharper, older, but alive. As she scanned the language in the acquisition briefs, she saw it buried 3 layers deep in translation code. A proposed sunset clause that would dissolve all consultant contracts within 60 days of a merger. Including hers, it wasn't just corporate cleanup, it was personal. They were erasing her before she could rise any higher. She closed her laptop and sat still for a long time. For the first time since arriving, her breath shook a little, but not from fear, from clarity. They wanted her to vanish, just like Jonas had years ago, just like Elise still hoped she would back in New York. She poured a glass of water, drank slowly, and opened her notebook. Across the top of the page, she wrote what the translator saw, then listed every phrase, glance, hesitation she'd observed since landing. The next morning, she arrived in Berlin. The building hosting the summit was glass-walled, modern, far from Wolfsburg's usual aesthetic. Inside, the conversation was hushed and clipped. Mira wore a headset but left the mic off again. She didn't need to speak. She just needed to see. There were moments where Jonas glanced her way but didn't acknowledge her. That was fine. She wasn't here for him. When the lead negotiator from the acquisition firm, an American named Barbara Klein, began reading from a bilingual proposal draft, Mira tensed. The German version she was holding didn't match the English. Subtle shifts, softened legal threats, vaguer cost projections. It wasn't just translation error, it was manipulation. She raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said quietly. All eyes turned. Jonas looked like he might intervene, but Barbara gestured for her to speak. "There's a conflict between language versions," Mira said. "In the German draft, Clause 17.3 refers to a deferred liability adjustment. But in the English, it states immediate enforceability. That's not a mistake, it's a strategic redirection." Barbara narrowed her eyes. "Are you authorized to speak?" Jonas began to answer, but Mira beat him to it. "I'm authorized to protect my firm's interests, and I'm fluent enough to know when one side's trying to outplay the other." Barbara stared at her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Noted." Mira sat down again, pulse steady. "Later." Jonas approached her in the hallway outside. "You're going to make enemies." Mira looked him straight in the eye. "Only if they deserve it." Back in her room that night, she called Leni. "I read 2 books today," Leni reported proudly, "and I learned how to say hello in French." "Really? Let me hear." Leni pronounced it slowly, bonjour. Mira grinned. "Perfect. What did you do today?" Mom and Mira leaned back on the bed and looked up at the ceiling. "I stopped some very important people from telling a lie." Leni giggled. "Like a detective, kind of," Mira said. "Like a translator who knows how to listen." After the call, Mira opened her laptop and wrote a report for Colton. It was clinical, thorough, and attached with every scan of every discrepancy she'd found. At the end, she added one line, "Language doesn't lie. People do. I'm listening." She sent the email and closed her eyes. The wind outside her Berlin hotel whistled like a second voice. And Mira Langston, once invisible, once underestimated, once discarded, knew she had just changed the course of the entire acquisition, not with threats, but with truth. The morning after the summit, Mira stood barefoot in her hotel room, holding a printout of the merger draft in one hand and her phone in the other. The clause was still there, hidden beneath layers of legal obfuscation and multilingual ambiguity. Section 18.4. It specified a reclassification of all external consultants. They'd be rendered non-essential to post-acquisition continuity within 60 days. It was a sterilized way of saying you're gone, and it was signed, backdated, ready to be filed. Her name wasn't mentioned, but the structure left no doubt. This wasn't just a routine sweep. This was surgical, targeted, and Mira realized, in a single quiet breath, just how precarious her position had always been. One word lost in translation, one missed phrase, and she'd vanish from the system without ceremony, without legacy, without even a line in the minutes. She sat down slowly at the edge of the bed. There were no tears. Not yet. Just weight, the kind that made her feel like even her bones were listening. All her life, she'd believed that understanding words could give her safety, that if she just worked hard enough, spoke clearly enough, translated accurately enough, people wouldn't erase her. But she was wrong. Language was not a shield. It was a mirror. And what she saw now was that power, real power, didn't just hide in silence. It disguised itself in politeness, in signatures, and soft legal tones meant to lull people into compliance. Her phone buzzed. It was Colton. Read the clause he asked without greeting. I did. I've already pulled 3 names from legal. They've admitted Wolfsburg tried to slide it in during overnight revisions. We're escalating. I want to be in the room when it happens, Mira said softly. You will be. She hesitated, then said, Colton, did you know they'd do this? There was a pause. I suspected they'd try to isolate you. Not this directly. You've become inconvenient for them. Mira exhaled. Because I noticed. No, he said, because you told the truth. In 3 languages, that night, back in Munich. Mira walked along the riverbank with her coat pulled tight around her. The cold bit into her gloves, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying moments from the past few months, the memo Elise had left anonymously, Jonas's avoidance, the looks in those glass rooms. They'd all assumed she'd stay grateful, stay quiet, stay small. She passed a street violinist playing something mournful and familiar. The sound hung in the air, sweet and aching. Mira stopped and closed her eyes. She remembered being 19, sitting in the university library, translating passages from Rilke by hand just to feel the shape of someone else's grief. She remembered sleeping on a cot beside Leni's crib, whispering German lullabies because she couldn't afford a nightlight, but she could afford a melody. She remembered silence, and then she remembered the first time Leni laughed not a baby's squeal, but a real, whole laugh, the kind that filled a room. Mira had written that sound down in her notebook as if it were a word she might someday forget how to speak. She opened her eyes. She wouldn't let them do this. The next morning, Mira walked into Wolfsburg headquarters and asked to see Henrik. He looked surprised. Mira, he said, standing awkwardly, we're just finalizing some merger details, I know. She interrupted. That's why I'm here. He gestured toward the chairs. Nervous? She didn't sit. I'm only going to ask once, she said, her voice even. Did you authorize the reclassification clause? Henrik blinked. Well, there are multiple stakeholders I asked about you. His throat bobbed. It was included as a protective measure. Standard. You mean strategic. He straightened, tone sharpening. We have a fiduciary responsibility to simplify the transition. No one is targeting you. Mira stepped closer. I see every word. Henrik, every omission, every skewed sentence. I know exactly what you're doing. You're not just cutting costs, you're cutting witnesses. He opened his mouth to speak, but she was already turning. You can tell Jonas I'll be delivering a full briefing to Hale's board this afternoon. Every discrepancy, every red flag, in every language. Outside the office, Mira didn't stop walking. She passed Jonas in the hallway without a glance. Wait, he said. She kept going. He followed. Mira, don't overplay this. She spun back. Eyes quiet fire. You left me once with nothing but a voicemail and a deadline. Don't think I won't survive you again. I'm not the enemy. Then why do you keep hiding behind people they stared at each other? Jonas looked older than she remembered. Not in years, but in clarity. Mira, he said softly, you've become terrifying. She nodded. Good. She didn't wait for a reply. That evening, Mira stood in front of the camera in a private conference room, presenting her findings to the entire Hale board. She outlined every translation discrepancy, every clause manipulation, every timing tactic. When she finished, there was silence. Then a single sentence from one of the senior board members, "This changes everything." After the call, Mira walked back to her hotel, boots echoing softly against the marble floor. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt grounded. Later that night, she video-called Leni. Her daughter appeared in her pajamas, cradling a mug of warm milk. "Mommy, did you fix the thing?" Mira smiled. "Almost. I told the truth really loud. Did they hear you?" "Yes, baby." They did. Leni looked thoughtful. "Are you going to come home soon?" Mira said. "And when I do, I'm bringing back something better than chocolate." Like what Mira smiled, eyes full. Proof. 3 days after Mira's board presentation, she returned to Wolfsburg headquarters not as a consultant, but as a delegate. Her badge had been upgraded. Strategic Liaison. Hale Industries. It now read, "No more external partner. No more second row." The air in the building had changed, not because of a memo, or a scandal, or some loud reckoning, but because the staff had heard whispers, that Mira Langston had caught something no one else had, that she had exposed a clause meant to erase her, and by doing so, saved a dozen contracts from the same fate. People began to nod as she passed them in the hall. Some avoided eye contact. Others offered quiet looks of solidarity. She didn't need applause. She needed alignment. The meeting was scheduled for 11 a.m. Jonas was late. Henrik kept checking his watch, pale and tight-lipped. Across the table sat 2 Hale board representatives flown in from New York: Sarah Kim, head of global policy, and Anthony Granger, the senior legal counsel. Mira sat between them, flipping through a translated slide deck. When Jonas finally entered, he looked different, not disheveled, just subdued. "Apologies," he said. No one responded. Sarah gestured for Mira to begin. Mira stood slowly, clicked the remote, and walked them through Wolfsburg's amended language framework. "This is not a correction," she said calmly. "This is a reinvention. We've removed performative diplomacy, tightened verb-subject precision, and ensured that legal implications hold identical weight across German, English, and French documents. Henrik attempted a weak interjection. Some phrasing may read as Mira cut in gently, legally binding. Granger nodded in approval. After 30 minutes, Sarah leaned back and spoke to Jonas directly. "You've built a promising platform," she said, "but the integrity of its growth depends on people who understand nuance. Hale will continue our partnership on one condition." Jonas folded his hands, "which is that Mira Langston serve as lead cultural consultant and final translation authority across all merger-related documentation." Henrik stiffened. Jonas said nothing for several seconds. Finally, he nodded. Agreed. Mira didn't flinch. After the meeting, she walked alone down the glass corridor that overlooked the city's skyline. Sarah caught up with her. "You did more than translate," she said quietly. "You diagnosed a pattern." "I just listened," Mira replied. "No, you read between everything no one else could see." Mira paused. "I used to think being fluent meant you could be in any room, but now I realize it's not about speaking the language. It's about recognizing when it's being used to hide something." Sarah smiled. "That's leadership." That night, Mira packed her things. She would return to New York the next morning, but first she had one stop. She took the train alone, 2 hours west to a small town outside Frankfurt. She hadn't been there in nearly 8 years. Her hands trembled slightly as she stood in front of the gray house with ivy curling around the columns. The same window panes, the same chipped post box, but the air was different now. She rang the bell. Jonas answered. He looked surprised, tired. "Mira, I don't need closure," she said. "I just need to say something." He stepped aside. She didn't move. "I spent so long thinking I was broken because of what you did," she said quietly. "But now I see what you couldn't give me wasn't love, it was courage. And that's something you still haven't found." He swallowed hard. "You deserve more. I gave myself more." She turned and walked down the path without waiting for a response. On the train ride back, she stared out the window, watching small towns roll past in blurs of yellow lights and quiet farmhouses. For the first time, she felt no pull to the past, no ache, just space. She called Leni as the train neared Munich. Her daughter's voice lifted the moment Mira said hello. "Did you fix the thing again?" Leni asked, grinning through the screen. "I did. Are you coming home now tomorrow morning? I'll be at your school by lunch." "Bring a story," Leni said, giggling. "A long one?" Mira smiled. "I've got a whole book's worth." When she hung up, her reflection flickered in the train window. A woman who had almost been erased, who had been underestimated, twice, who had used every quiet moment, every page, every sentence like a chisel carving space where none had been offered. And she realized something simple. They'd sent her to translate, but she'd returned speaking a language only power could understand. Truth. Measured, precise, unapologetic. The plane touched down in New York just after 10 and Mira moved through customs with the calm rhythm of someone who had walked through harder gates. Her carry-on glided behind her, silent on the polished floor, holding only essentials: one coat, her work files, and a folded piece of construction paper with a drawing of a rainbow and 2 stick figures holding hands. She emerged into arrivals and scanned the crowd. And then she saw her Leni, small arms stretched wide like they could catch the entire sky. Mira dropped her bag and knelt. Leni collided into her chest with a laugh that felt like sunlight. "You're back?" "I'm back," Mira whispered into her hair. "For good." Ms. Rivera gave Mira a kind smile from behind, holding Leni's backpack. "Her reading scores jumped while you were gone," she said, "and she taught my nephew how to say butterfly in French." Mira chuckled. "She's been studying. She's been preparing," Ms. Rivera said, just like her mother. That afternoon, Mira took Leni to their favorite bakery, the one with too much powdered sugar on everything and a bell that rang every time the door opened. They sat by the window, sharing a raspberry tart. Outside, the wind carried leaves in slow spirals across the sidewalk. Leni leaned her head on Mira's shoulder. "Will you have to leave again?" "No," Mira said. They listened this time. Leni thought for a moment. "Because you spoke louder." "No," Mira said, brushing a crumb from her daughter's cheek. "Because I stopped waiting for permission to speak at all." Leni reached into her little jacket pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was folded into a square, a drawing, this time in ink. It showed a woman standing in front of a tall building, arms outstretched, with small speech bubbles in different languages floating around her. At the bottom, in big block letters, Leni had written, "My mom can speak everything." Mira stared at the paper, not because of the drawing, but because of the idea. Everything. What did it mean to speak everything? Not just languages, not just dialects, but truths people refuse to say, words buried in contracts. Silence between boardroom walls. That moment when you look someone in the eye and say, "I see you, I understand you, and I will not be erased." That was everything. Mira folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into her coat pocket. At home that night, she lit a candle and sat at the table with a blank journal in front of her. Not for translation, not for client notes. This was different. She wrote one sentence. "I survived being silent." Then another. "But I live by speaking." And then she closed the book. A week later, she received a call from Hale Industries. Colton's voice was even but tinged with something else, almost reverent. "I wanted you to hear it from me," he said. "The board voted to create a new position, Chief of Language and Culture Integration." Mira raised an eyebrow. "That's not a title that existed before." "Exactly. Because you defined it." There was a pause. "I know you may want time," he continued, "but I hope you'll consider it. Full autonomy. Your own team. Global authority on all documentation strategy, especially in multilingual markets." She thought of Elise. She thought of Jonas. And then she thought of herself, standing in that Berlin conference room, calling out a lie that could have buried 100 voices. "I'll consider it," she said. He didn't push. He didn't need to. A few days later, Mira stood in front of a classroom at a local community center. She had offered to teach a free workshop for immigrant women on language, confidence, and reading contracts, not just vocabulary, understanding. Across the room sat mothers, daughters, a grandmother who had never signed a lease in her name before. They listened as Mira told them how the word consultant could be used to exclude someone, how a clause buried 3 pages deep could cost them months of labor, how words had weight, and how they could carry it. And when one woman raised her hand and asked, "But what if they don't listen to us?" Mira smiled gently. "Then we speak louder, or we write it down, or we teach our daughters, so that someday they'll speak for us in every room we couldn't enter." That night, Mira tucked Leni into bed. The girl had fallen asleep with her French workbook on her chest. She reached to remove it, but Leni stirred. "Don't take it," she mumbled. "I'll leave it right here," Mira whispered. "Safe." She turned off the light. In the dark, Mira stood in the doorway a moment longer, watching her daughter breathe in rhythm, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was waiting for the next fight. She felt like she had already won, not with revenge, not with power, but with presence, and the quiet certainty that no one, not Elise, not Jonas, not an entire system of muted gatekeepers could ever take her voice again. Because now the world didn't just hear her, it echoed her. Sometimes it doesn't take a protest, or a courtroom, or even a confrontation. Sometimes all it takes is someone quietly saying, "I see what you did, and I won't let it stand." Mira Langston didn't carry a title of power. She didn't walk in with authority. She built it, word by word, clause by clause, truth by quiet truth. In a world where women like her are often silenced by fine print, bureaucracy, or corporate erasure, she proved something extraordinary: that listening is power, that empathy is intelligence, and that language, when used with integrity, can unmask even the most polished injustice. This wasn't just a story about a translator. It was a story about every person who's ever been edited out of the narrative, every mother who's been told to stay small, every daughter who watches quietly then speaks boldly when it matters most. To those still fighting to be heard, remember Mira's journey. Sometimes the loudest revolution is spoken softly, and sometimes the smallest girl is the first to change everything. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more emotional, empowering stories. We're just getting started, and we see you.